Hi, Roxy Keller here again, baking my way through the Great British Baking Show challenges. And today we are doing a technical challenge, which each week on the show, if you watch the show, you know that the second challenge of the day is to do a technical challenge. And that means that one of the judges has selected a recipe and the contestants are given the ingredients and a pared down recipe, and they're told what they're making, but a lot of times the bakers don't know what the final product is supposed to look like. And so it's a challenge to complete the task, and then the judges look at the results under blind conditions, so they don't know who made which ones. And so the reason I wanted to try working my way through all of the Great British Baking Show challenges is because I am a home baker. I wanted to see if I could do these challenges myself. Now, the technical challenges, the recipes for the technical challenges are available online. And of course, I know what the final product looks like. So I wanted to do this one today. This is a challenge set by the Judge Prue Leith, and these are chocolate mini rolls. So they are similar to a log roll or a bûche de Noël type of roll cake, but they are miniature, and they have a chocolate coating on them. And I actually did this yesterday, the very first time I've ever done this recipe, and I recorded it for my YouTube channel, but I had so many technical difficulties that I'm doing it a second time. So I learned a lot by doing the recipe yesterday, and I'm going to make a couple of changes today to make them even a little bit better. But I can show you my resulting little mini rolls, and they look pretty good. They taste good, and I'm going to do them again today. We start with the chocolate portion of the cake, and the challenge, one of the challenges in this recipe is that there are no leavening agents, meaning there's no flour, there's no baking powder or baking soda, which are the typical leavening agents. The only leavening ingredient are egg whites. So we need to whip the egg whites to stiff peaks and then add that to the cake. But we're going to start with the chocolate, and the recipe calls for 60 grams of 100% cocoa powder. Again, we will weigh these ingredients. This is unsweetened or 100% cocoa powder. To that, we add 30 grams of butter that has been melted. Now, the recipe calls for unsalted butter, but I always use salted butter. There's only about a quarter teaspoon of salt in every stick of butter, so there are very few recipes that don't need at least that much salt. There's a few exceptions that I think of, but we'll get to that. So I've melted 30 grams of salted butter, and that's a little over 2 tablespoons. Next, we add 4 tablespoons of boiling water, and we use boiling water because that helps to release the flavors of the cocoa powder. The recipe also calls for a teaspoon of vanilla to be added at this time, but the heat from the boiling water can take away some of the flavor of the vanilla, so I'm going to add that a little bit later. I'm going to mix this. This is a very thick, lumpy texture, but we will fix that later. Okay, so one thing I haven't yet done is preheat the oven, and that's because I wanted to show you the extra thermometer that I keep in my oven to double check the temperature. This is the thermometer that I keep inside my oven to make sure that it's staying at whatever temperature I need. It hangs from one of the racks and is easy to read. So now I have the oven preheating to 350 degrees, and the next thing we'll do is put together our eggs. Again, we want to whip the egg whites separately from the egg yolks. So the first thing we're going to do is separate our yolks from our whites. And I have an advantage that I have 2 of these bowls for my stand mixer, so it makes it quite easy to mix 2 different types of ingredients and not have to wash the bowls in between. I took out my eggs a little bit ago, so they are at room temperature, and I'm going to separate the egg yolks. The whites will go in this bowl, and the yolks in this one. We want to make sure that we get very little or no egg yolks into our egg white mixture, and that we use a very clean mixing bowl. Otherwise, the egg whites will not form peaks. For a long time, I thought that if you had even the tiniest hint of egg yolk in your egg whites, that they wouldn't whip up, but that's not true. You can have a teeny tiny bit, but you definitely want to try to keep that out. Okay, so for the egg yolks, we're going to beat those a little bit with the paddle attachment. To the beaten egg yolks, we will add 100 grams of what the British call caster sugar. And when you get a recipe that's British, you'll find several words that are slightly different from those we use here in the United States. And caster sugar is just a granulated sugar where the particle size is somewhere in between our typical white granulated sugar and powdered or confectioner sugar. But our white granulated sugar works just fine. I'm going to weigh out 100 grams of white granulated sugar and mix. To this, we will add our chocolate mixture. To this, we can also add the 1 teaspoon of vanilla and mix. Now that mixture is still a bit lumpy. Those chocolate chunks did not completely dissolve into the egg sugar mixture. And this happened yesterday too, but it didn't seem to be a problem for the roll cake. While that was mixing, the timer on my oven went off, and I have an oven where it just sets a particular time to get to the oven temperature. And so after 8 minutes, it was only heated to 250 degrees, which is why I really like that internal thermometer, because then I can wait until the oven has reached 350 to make sure before I put in my cakes. Okay, now we're going to whisk the egg whites. For this, we will use the whisk attachment, and just like you need a very clean bowl, you also need a clean whisk. And if you have any concerns that you might have any oil or any other materials on your bowl or your whisk, you can just wipe them down with a little bit of vinegar, and that will take care of it. Whisking at high speed will take about 3.5 minutes for the eggs to come to a stiff peak. Okay, so we are at stiff peaks, which means if I just lift up some of the egg whites, the peak on the bottom stays up and it doesn't fold over. To our whipped egg whites, we need to add the remaining 50 grams of white granulated sugar, 50 grams of sugar. That basically makes a nice meringue. Now it's time to mix the chocolate with the egg whites, and we start by putting about a third of the egg whites into our chocolate and mixing that with the blender, with the mixer. We add about a third of the egg whites and mix that with the mixer. The rest we will fold in to keep the air that we whipped into peaks. Now we will fold in the remainder of the egg whites. First, I'm just going to put them in the bowl with the chocolate. It's best to fold with a metal spoon, and folding means that we will scoop some of the chocolate and stir it around. And when we use the metal spoon edge, we go through the eggs and minimize the amount of air that we lose from the egg whites. If we were to use the flat edge of the spoon, it would push a lot of the air out. So I'm going to do this several times until it's mixed fairly well. We don't want to even do this too many times or it will lose all of its air. Now it still looks a bit needing of mixing, but I think there's probably a perfect point to stop folding. Not exactly sure when that is, but just do my best. We're now ready to put this in the baking pans. The baking pans we're using are, in the recipe, they call them 20 centimeters by 30 centimeters, which is a quarter of a sheet cake. And in the United States, a 12.5 by 9-inch baking surface is as close as we can get to that. So I have 2 of these. We're going to pour half of the cake mixture into each of these. First, I'm going to spray them with baking spray, then put parchment paper, then spray them again, and then we will pour in the cake mixture. The baking spray I like to use for these is this Pam baking spray because it seems to be the best at releasing cakes from a pan. Probably you can use just about anything, but I feel confident that I can get the cake out with this. I'm going to spray these over the sink so that the overspray doesn't get on my countertops. They are sprayed. I'll give them one more quick spritz of the spray. We want to divide these as evenly as possible between the 2 pans, and I know how much my bowl weighs, so I can weigh the bowl in the mixture, subtract the weight of the bowl, and then add half of that to each pan. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I like to get it as close as possible. Half of the mixture that's in here weighs about 290 grams. That's what I calculated yesterday, so it's nice to see consistent results. Fairly perfect. Now I want to spread the mixtures across the pan, and as yesterday I noticed that there are little chunks of chocolate and the egg whites seem to float to the top. Didn't seem to be a problem. They baked just fine like that. We're ready to bake. These should take about, the recipe says 12 to 18 minutes. Mine were done at about 12 minutes yesterday. Like yesterday, 12 minutes was the perfect time for these to bake at 350 degrees. And now At this point, the instructions say to put a damp towel over each one of these sheets and then let them completely cool down. Now, prior to yesterday, I had never made these before, but I have made the large size log rolls or Yule logs, and it's always super important to roll the cake while it's still warm. That way it will roll without cracking when you're ready to add the fillings. And so that's what I'm going to do, because it worked yesterday, and I think that's better than waiting until they completely cool down. That being said, I am going to wait about 5 minutes before I turn these out and roll them up. I have 2 cold cookie sheets that I'm going to flip these out onto. First, I'm going to put down a piece of parchment paper on the top of each one. I'm going to spritz these a little bit with some baking spray. Here I'm just using a little bit of avocado spray. Okay, now they are flipped. These should come off easily. Yay! Okay, so I'm ready to roll them up, and each of these is supposed to make 6 mini rolls, which means we eventually will cut the cake in half and then cut these in 3s. That will give us 6. First, we remove the parchment paper. Now I'm ready to roll. I'll roll one from the short edge, roll one side up to about halfway, turn it around, and roll up the other side. Until we have approximately the same size, and the same for the other one. They're both rolled, so now I will let them cool completely like this. It won't take very long because they are quite thin. While the cakes are cooling, I'm going to go ahead and make the filling. And this is a peppermint cream filling. There are only 3 ingredients: butter, what the British call icing sugar, but it's just our powdered sugar or confectioner's sugar, and what the British call peppermint essence, but we call peppermint extract. So I have softened butter. This is 150 grams of butter, and again, I used salted. The powdered sugar needs to be sifted, and when I made this recipe yesterday, the peppermint cream seemed a bit thick, so I'm going to use a little bit less powdered sugar. The recipe calls for 300 grams. I think I'm going to try 270 and then mix it up and see what the texture is. I watch on the baking shows a lot of times if the bakers have a problem with one of their bakes, they say they're never going to bake that again. Well, I'm kind of just the opposite. I like to try the recipe over again until I get it right. And so even from yesterday to today, doing this recipe that I've never done before, I'm already making some changes to try to make it better. We'll use the paddle attachment I'm going to cover this with this barrier to try to keep the powdered sugar from drying out, since the butter is not very much butter. 1 teaspoon of peppermint extract. Now, when the bakers did this as their challenge, they were not told how much peppermint extract to use, so some used too much, some used too little. Fortunately, they tell us how much to use, and it tasted good yesterday. It wasn't too pepperminty, so 1 teaspoon. You need to scrape down the sides, and so far it still seems quite thick. It's definitely thick enough with 270 grams of powdered sugar, so I'm not going to add any more. I do want to taste it. It's a good idea to see if it's too pepperminty or not pepperminty enough. Tastes quite good. I'm ready to spread the filling into the cakes. So I unroll them. And I didn't change this part of the recipe from yesterday because the filling seemed to be just the right amount. The frosting for the coconut cake that I did on the previous show was way too much frosting, but we just cut up some fresh fruit and used it on that fresh fruit, and it was delicious. Although the peppermint cream is quite thick, it actually spreads very nicely. This one split a little bit when I rolled it, I think because it folded up in the middle. We'll see. Somehow I'll have to fix that. These cakes, this cake has definitely given me some challenges today. It seems to be breaking all over the place. Just goes to show that you can do the exact same thing 2 days in a row and have different outcomes. But that doesn't mean it's bad. We'll make it work. Again, at this point, the recipe says to roll up both sides and then cut down the middle, but I don't see any reason why not cut them right now. Keep them apart and roll them up. So I did it yesterday. It worked well. I'm going to do it again today. These are 30 centimeters long, so at the 15 centimeter mark, I will cut these. Mark that side, go to the other side. And cut. Now I'll roll them up. This is the good one. So a bit of cracking in the topping, but I think it will be fine once we put on the topping. It smells delicious. It smells like a peppermint Oreo cookie. This one might be a bit more of a challenge, we'll see. Even sticking to the paper a little bit. Okay, not perfect, but the glaze, the chocolate coating, should cover some of these errors. The first thing I need to do is cut off the ends to make them nice and straight. I'm using this bread knife because it cuts really well. You can just use a regular steak knife. Okay, now the baking show, one of the things that Paul and Prue, the two judges, always say is that they want perfectly identical desserts. And I doubt that I can do perfectly identical, but I'm going to do my best. I need to cut each of these logs into 3 equal lengths, and these are about 21 centimeters long, so each one should be 7 centimeters. So for pouring the chocolate glaze, we set up a rack on top of a cookie sheet or baking sheet, and we'll set the rolls on there in preparation for being covered. For the chocolate covering, the recipe calls for 70% chocolate and milk chocolate, a blend of those two. And I think it calls for 70%. I only have 60%. Who cares? I can use more of this and less of the milk chocolate if I want to be precise, but I'm not that worried about it. I think you could probably use even like a Hershey's special dark chocolate, which is 45%, and blending 60 or 70 with milk chocolate probably gives you about that. So the recipe calls for 200 grams of dark chocolate, the 70%, and 200 grams of milk chocolate. Now yesterday when I did this, I just barely had enough chocolate to cover all of the mini rolls, so I'm actually going to use a little bit extra today. Each of these bars weighs 113 grams, and I'm going to use all of both bars, which I also did yesterday. We'll put this in the microwave to heat it up and melt all of the chocolate. 228 grams. I don't have milk chocolate in the bar. I just have these milk chocolate morsels. I think I'll add 300 grams. I want to make sure I have enough chocolate. Okay, I'm going to put this in the microwave for about a minute, stir it, and then about every 20 to 30 seconds I'll stir it until it gets completely melted, and then don't want to over microwave it because it will overcook. Okay, the chocolate is melted. It seems quite thin, which is good. And now I want to pour it over the mini cakes and smooth it or spread a little bit with this. The over dripping will go into the pan, but I want to try to lose as little as possible. We want to get it around the ends. I just remembered that in the recipe, it calls for you to take the mini rolls and dip them so that they have chocolate all around, including the bottom. On the technical challenge, they didn't ask the contestants to do that part. They said, don't worry about that part, but you can do that if you like. quicker we get this done, the better chance there is for time that the ones that are sitting here can sort of smooth out as they sit and set up. Well, they definitely aren't going to be identical. They're going to be delicious, and they're going to look pretty good, but maybe not identical. As I picked these up, the ones from this tray, I could tell that they were a bit more dense, and I think this is the tray where I poured the cake in second. I poured the cake for that one first. So I think a lot of the lightweight mix, more egg whites, got into this batch and fewer into this batch. I think more of that dense chocolate cake mix got into this batch. So I think I would probably do something different at the beginning of this recipe and mix the chocolate with the eggs and then add some of the other ingredients, just so you don't get that big clumpiness of the liquid mix. It just wasn't very homogeneous. Well, it was definitely a good idea to add that extra 100 grams of chocolate because I used it all, and it gave me the chance to go back and cover up some areas that were still there. Okay, the last thing to add to our mini rolls is the drizzle of white chocolate, which just makes them look a little fancier, and hopefully it'll cover up some of the imperfections of the chocolate glaze. Now, my glazed chocolate is still not perfect, and now I don't know if it's because my chocolate was not hot enough or if I need more chocolate. I use the microwave to heat up the chocolate, and the recipe actually calls for a double boiler or a bain-marie, the professional chefs call it. And so mine aren't perfect, but now I'm going to add the chocolate. It calls for 100 grams of white chocolate. Again, these bars come in 113 grams. So I'm going to melt that and then put it in a piping bag. We have melted white chocolate, and I was a little worried yesterday about putting melted white chocolate in a piping bag because I thought it might be too hot. But even though the bowl is quite hot, the chocolate itself isn't that hot, so it works just fine. Okay, so I just need to cut a hole in the bag and drizzle it over the mini rolls. In the baking show, they didn't tell the contestants how to drizzle that white chocolate, so there were a couple different versions. You can do it however you like. I know yesterday when I was doing it, I cut the hole the first time too small, and when I tried to drizzle, it got very inconsistent, very wiggly. So I'm going to make sure to cut the hole large enough this time and then just wave it over think I did it again. I think it needs to be a little bit bigger. Now that turned out to be a little bit larger hole than I did yesterday. So the stripes are a little bit thicker, but I used more of the white chocolate, so that's fine. Now, after they set, I will put them on my display board. And yesterday, I didn't measure out where to set these, so I was running out of room. I ended up squeezing them together, and it just didn't look so good. So this time, I'm going to measure. Okay, I've measured where I want them on my board, and they are not 100% set up yet. They will actually be hard chocolate once they are completely set, and frankly, I'm not sure if I love that about them, that they're hard set. I might, if and when I do these again, I'll probably add some other liquid milk or butter to the chocolate so that the chocolate stays a little bit softer. Okay, well, that placement is much better than yesterday. I didn't want to write on my board, so I used these Post-it notes to mark where I wanted to put them. And there we go. I'll call that a success. Well, my husband is here today, so I'm going to ask him to let me know what he thinks. He did try the ones yesterday, so we'll see if these are any different. Come on.
Hello, everybody.
This is my husband, Chauncey, and his head might be cut off. You might have to bend down a little bit. But here they are. What do you think?
All right. Well, after judging the ones yesterday, they look pretty even. This one's a little wider than the others. That was a little wider than the others. The icing looks very, very even this time among all of them. So let's try one.
Okay. Let's see how the swirl looks. It's pretty good.
Yep.
I'll get you a whole one now.
There is definitely a curl. All right. Let's just take a bite. Yeah, definitely. The chocolate's not as thick as yesterday. The peppermint isn't as intense as it was yesterday.
Is that a good thing?
I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
I think yesterday was just a little overpowering. So I'm having another bite.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Good stuff. All right.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, that's it for this episode. And the next challenge will be the Showstopper Challenge. And for Cake Week, they were challenged to do an illusion cake. So that means you make a cake and decorate it so that it looks like anything but a cake. So someone might do a stack of books, or a pineapple, or a bowl of Asian food. They do some really amazing things. And I, again, am not a professional baker. I'm a botanist by day, and I have not done a lot of extensive baking, but I have been decorating cakes since I was 16, but I have never used fondant. So I'm planning to do a showstopper. I'm think I'm going to do a garden gnome, and I think I will need fondant to cover it with fondant. So it will be a challenge and an experience. So see you next time.